Hello, my name is Nina. Welcome to my channel, Inside the Mind of a Human Predator. In this video, I wanted to discuss the way a human predator, a maladaptive person in your life, monopolizes your time, perhaps without you realizing it. As always, please like, share, and subscribe so that others could have access to this information because of the way the YouTube algorithm works. Disclaimer number one, as usual, I'm not a mental health professional and the opinions expressed here are mine and mine alone based on personal experience and autodidactic research. Disclaimer number two, as always, when I discuss particular maladaptive traits, I always urge you to look at them in the context of long-term pervasive behavior patterns that also exhibit other maladaptive harmful traits, as opposed to one-off incidents that we could all be guilty of. And disclaimer number three, we are talking about a variety of interpersonal relationships, not just romantic partnerships. So this information does not only pertain to intimate partners, but also family of origin, also and especially family of origin, work situations with colleagues and bosses, and even friendships. So why am I focusing on the subject? Well, it's one of those red flags that often goes unnoticed. But before I get into this in a little bit more detail, I'd like to give you a pretty gross sounding analogy of the relationship between the target and the maladaptive individual, which is actually quite accurate. In that analogy is basically the relationship between a parasite and a host, in which the toxic, maladaptive, dysfunctional person with long-term harmful patterns of behavior is the parasite, and the host is you, the target. So the parasite gradually takes over the host's life to the point where the host loses his or her identity. But it often begins in a pretty benign way. So let's say you are meeting a friend or a romantic prospect for coffee, and he or she is late. Not a lot, by a little bit, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and he or she has a legitimate excuse. Eventually shows up and everything goes fine. Obviously, you write this off. All of us are late once in a while. Traffic, children getting sick, an important business phone call. As time goes on, you realize that the person in question is often late, always late. And there's always an excuse for being late, and it often sounds legitimate. Obviously, this irritates you, but you are a polite, civilized person, so you may not even bring this up because not everyone can be as punctual. Not everyone is perfect. You have your own imperfections, and things could be much worse. Interestingly, the one or two occasions when you have a legitimate reason to be late or to cancel, the person in question does not show the same level of consideration and is quite irritated by your legitimate excuses. But once again, you justify this to yourself, saying, no one's perfect. They're just disorganized. They're so creative. This is why they're disorganized. As time goes on, this individual begins to monopolize your time more and more. Now, in the case of romantic partnerships, he or she starts complaining that you spend too much time with your friends, your sister, on solitary hobbies, whereas he or she likes you so much that he or she would love to spend more time with you and develop more shared hobbies, which once again sounds like a totally legitimate mode of behavior, except the problem is that it's a gradual progression to take away your identity. And as things go on, this individual begins to isolate you from your friends, from your family, from your hobbies, and slowly takes over your life with things that he or she is interested in. You're now only interacting with his or her group of friends, if there are such friends, period. In some cases, individuals who engage in this behavior are so maladaptive that other than casual acquaintances. They have no long-term friendships. And this individual also monopolizes your time by possibly asking for help. He or she may be running a business, a new business, or an organization where this individual requires some help. Naturally, you volunteer, you're not being paid for it, and the grand future faking picture of amazing business opportunities, organizational opportunities is presented before you, which is why you are volunteering your time. And of course, you also continue trying to be polite and helpful. Now, as time goes on, and if this is the case of a romantic relationship, it's quite likely that at this stage you are now being denigrated for anything and everything, including your own interests. So you're in this constant mode of having to prove yourself to the maladaptive, toxic person, prove your worth, essentially. And you do so by continuing to help him or her out in these voluntary ways, by engaging in his or her hobbies. On top of that, it's also quite likely that if this individual is quite dysfunctional, then he or she has the unpredictable, rages, and mood swings, which are often described as the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality, and you're constantly walking on eggshells trying to foresee when the next rage is coming, and perhaps even an instance of physical violence. So at this stage, not only are you isolated from friends and family, not only have you lost your hobbies, not only are you spending what's left of your free time on helping this individual out with an organization or a business that he or she is running with supposedly amazing goals for the future, but you're also solely focused on him or her because you're trying to predict these mood swings. So there's really not much left of your identity. You're completely focused on this individual, which is of course what he or she wanted. This is that endless attention, which some describe as narcissistic supply, that they so desperately crave. At this stage, you, the target, are essentially that very host to the proverbial parasite that I've described earlier on, which is a very gross but accurate analogy. And in some cases, it is even more so accurate because there might be financial gain involved on the part of the human predator if he or she is using your voluntary help to run a business or an organization. So at this stage, the sole purpose of your existence is providing him or her with undivided attention, with that well-known narcissistic supply, and there's really no other reason for your existence. Now, this is a romantic partnership. Now, think about situations with a family of origin. Many of us have encountered a caregiver. We're adults, we'll live separately. At the same time, we try to maintain contact with them. We try to help them out to the best of our ability while accounting for our own schedule, our own issues that we face on a daily basis. This individual may even be very accomplished, successful professionally, yet this individual engages in covert narcissistic behaviors like learned helplessness and guilt tripping you to constantly help him out with the seemingly never-ending crises that he or she seems to find himself or herself in on a monthly, if not weekly, if not daily basis. And there seems to be no consideration for your obligations, your schedule. It has to be handled right now because it's your responsibility as a family member. So the range of manipulating your time is really quite broad, and it may be a lot more subtle than you think. For instance, you may be sharing custody with a maladaptive individual, and this individual always signs up your children for extracurricular classes on your parenting time. Now, it's going to be very difficult to say no to the child who is used as a pawn in this very surgically specific manipulation scenario, because the child really wants to take this class. Of course, the maladaptive personality has not consulted you about this, And how can you say no? You would be the awful parent who is saying no to the child. How can you say no to your mom, dad, aunt, sister, brother who is constantly manipulating you to help out with these aforementioned crises, even though they seem to be fully functional in other areas of their life, to the point where sometimes they exaggerate illnesses? And the whole slew of cultural and family obligations completely overwhelm you, and you really can't say no. So pay attention to, again, the long-term patterns of behavior, the fact that the forms of manipulation can be very covert as opposed to outright aggression or raging, and pay attention to the other maladaptive traits that the person in question exhibits in your life. How can you deal with this? Well, setting boundaries is the best way to deal with this, but in some cases where there are family obligations, for instance, it's not easy, and you may end up feeling like the bad guy, even though you are protecting your own life, your own obligations, and your own schedule, but it's necessary. So it really depends on your circumstances as to the extent that you could set such boundaries. So hopefully this more subtle information video about the way your time is monopolized by the dysfunctional, toxic person has been helpful to you. As always, thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe.